Game that we're going to make. It's called the Shooter game. Here's a quick look at what it's going to look like when we're done. Something like this. It's a lot of fun. We're going to use GameMaker, and you'll have a ship and a scoreboard at the bottom, and you go and shoot enemies, and eventually they'll start shooting at you, and it gets harder as it goes on. And if you crash into them, or if they hit you enough, you will die. Okay, so to get started, you're going to see in Mr. Poy's assignments, you're going to copy the folder GameMaker tutorial, and we'll start with the tutorial on the Shooter game. Before we start with the tutorial, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going to be of interest to you, and that's variables. We've worked a little bit with variables already in GameMaker, but I just want to go through and take a quick second here to go through a little bit about variables. So what a variable is something that can store information. So we can retrieve and get a value of something. Some values are reserved. These are values that GameMaker has and wants us to work with. So these are some built-in variables. One of them is called x. And x is how far to the left or how far to the right, or in other words, the x-coordinate of the instance. And the position is 0 in the top left and larger as it goes right. For y is the up and down position, or the y coordinate of the instance, and again it starts at 0 at the top of the screen and goes on. We worked a little bit in the maze game with those, I believe. H speed is the speed that we're going, but it's the horizontal speed. So how fast are we going to the left or to the right? If we go to the left, it becomes negative. To the right is positive. V speed is what we call the vertical speed. And that is how fast are we going down the screen. So V is for vertical speed. If we're going up the screen, that vertical speed would become negative. Three other variables here. Speed, that's the speed in the current direction. Visible. Visible has only two values we can assign to it. One is a 0. So if we say the visible variable is 0, it's invisible. If we say the variable visible is 1, it's visible. And same with solid. 0 is not solid, 1 is solid. So those are some variables that we're going to work with in this game. Global variables. So what's the difference between a variable and a global variable? Well, let me just launch GameMaker and show you where the variable is located. If I had an object, you'll see that we have a way to, so let's call this object player. And in this object, you'll see over here in the control, there is an action called, well, okay, let me say keyboard space key. It's going to change the variable. So there's a variable here, and here's where I could change it. So for example, if I change the variable solid and made it a value of 1, it would be solid. If I had a variable called visible and I made it 0, it would be invisible. So what would be invisible? What would be invisible would be object player, because that is the object I'm working with. So that's what I mean by a local variable. It's based on the object. So I've got an object, and it's the variable that is inside of this object. So for example, the X position, if I want to move object player, I could say the variable is going to be +5 relative to where I am, and it's going to move that variable 5 pixels to the right. So that's the variable X that's located to object player. It wouldn't modify any other objects. Its variable is associated directly with the player object in this case. Now, getting back to global variables are a little bit different. Global variables are just variables for the game. So if I had a global variable in my GameMaker game, I could add a variable here and use one of the global variable, and one of the global variables is called lives. And so I could say lives is 2, or score. And score could be 100 points relative. So this variable, I could do it in object player, or I could do it in any object. It doesn't matter what object. It's available anywhere. Probably it's a little confusing at this point. Once you actually put them in practice, they'll make a little bit more sense. Okay, to get started with the game, what we're going to do is, as you may remember the game that you saw just a moment ago, the shooter game, there was a plane that was flying over water. So the very first thing I want to do is I'm going to use some water. So I need to create a sprite, and so I'm going to call this sprite, as we always do, SPR, and then a descriptive word. So I'm going to call it back water. And in this case, it's not going to actually be a sprite, it's going to be a background. So, sorry, I've goofed already. So I'm going to start with a background, and because it's a background, I'm not going to use the 3 letters of SPR, because usually I use SPR for just sprites. In this case, I'm going to call it just back_water. Okay, so this is a background. And I'm going to then go load, and I'm going to go to the files that I copied from drive W. So I already copied the folder, or you'll have copied the folder from the resources, and water, of course, is at the very bottom, and it's 32 by 32 pixels, and I'm going to say OK. And so this is going to be a some water. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a room already. And for backgrounds, I'm going to select the background image of backwater. And here's a very interesting thing. I'm going to set a global variable called the vertical speed, and I'm going to set it to 2. Okay, so I'm going to do this, and when I play, the water is going to appear as if it's scrolling down at a speed of 2. If you want, I'll hit play here so you can see real quick. And you'll see the water appears in just a second. Once it compiles, it's going to appear like it's scrolling down the screen. So there's the water going down the screen. Okay, so that's fine. I'll stop the game. The next thing I'm going to do is create some sprites. So I use the first 3 letters of SPR, and I'm going to call the first one Island, ISLAND, and I'll call it number 1. I've got 3 islands, and again, I'm going to go to that same folder that you're going to put in your, copy it into your drive H. It's from the assignments. It's called GM Tutorial Second Game, and in the resources, I'm going to put Island 1, and I'm going to put Island 2, and I don't see Island 2 on here, so it looks like I need to copy. That must have accidentally got deleted, so I need to copy another one in just a second. I'll do that. Okay, what we're going to do with the islands is the events in the island. What I want to do is I'm going to create objects for each island, and I'll show you just Island 1. So I'll call it OBJ Island 1. I'm going to put the Island 1 sprite, and in the create event, I'm going to set its vertical speed, and I want it to go at the same speed as the water in the background, which is a speed of 2. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the step event, And the step event is walking through the program. And what I'm going to do in the step event is I'm going to test a variable. So I'm going to go to the Control tab, and I'm going to select a variable. The variable I'm going to test is the variable y. And you may remember just a few moments ago I talked about variable y. Variable y is the y coordinate, the y position. There's some another variable called room height, and I could do that one as well. But the variable y. So I'm going to test variable y, and I want to test its value if its value is room height and if it's larger than. So in other words, when the island appears to jump off the screen, what I want to do, so I'm going to test the variable, what I'm going to do is if that is true, I'm going to take the variable, or rather I'm going to jump to position. So I'm going to use the jump object, and I'm going to say x I want is random, which means generate a value that is unknown. Room width, so somewhere in the room, and the y position I'm going to say is -64. So -64 is going to be above the screen. And voila, if it's larger than the room height, y is now going to be -64, so it's going to be above the room, and random room width is going to be where its x coordinate is going to be. So when I press play here, I've only got, oh shoot, I didn't add the island to the room yet. So one last thing I want to do is put this object into my room so I can test it. Right now there's nothing. So I'm going to go to the room, and I'm going to say objects. I'm going to put the island object. Let's put an island right here. And when I press play, the island should go at the same speed as the background water. And there's the island going at the same speed as the background water. And then when it gets larger than the room height, the island is going to go somewhere different. So it jumped to somewhere different, in this case the middle of the screen. It's almost larger than room height. Okay, here it goes. And now randomly it goes x to a different location and y -64. So here we go. Y is going to be -64 above the screen and in about the same location. Okay, so it's going to keep doing this forever. So it looks like there's an infinite number of islands.